Hi, I'm Joe Miller, workers' compensation attorney and personal injury attorney in North Carolina and Virginia. So if you watch my videos, if you've watched them before, you know that usually I don't start out with an introduction like that. Usually what I do is I set up a scenario in a workers' compensation case or another type of case, like a personal injury case, and I go on to describe the scenario and the problem that it presents, and then I proceed to introduce myself, and then we talk about the problem and how to solve it, or how to describe the legal issues surrounding that problem. But in this video, we're going to discuss something very difficult, and that's the subject of workplace violence in the context of Virginia workers' compensation. And of course, that's going to include a discussion, unfortunately, of some of the recent horrific violent mass shootings that have occurred over the last few years. And in fact, I recently gave a presentation on this very subject just recently at the Virginia Workers' Compensation Commission conference in Richmond with my good friend and colleague on the other side, Mr. Steve Marshall, and also with Tabitha Saunders from the Virginia Victims Fund. We're going to get in a little bit at the end into what that is and why that's important and when you can call upon them if need be. That's me in the middle there. To my left is Mr. Marshall. And then to my right is Ms. Saunders from the Virginia Victims Fund. Given the subject matter of what we're going to discuss in this video, I do think it's important to come out and just say what I do and then give this warning because look, there are some people that may be watching this that have been through this. If you could have been a witness to something that is very difficult and you're easily triggered. I've represented people like this, and if that's the case, you're easily triggered by hearing about this stuff. I really suggest that you take precautions and maybe have a trusted friend watch this for you rather than be triggered. I don't want to be responsible for causing you to have to go to the hospital or have a panic attack or anything like that. With that warning, here we go. You've been forewarned. So unfortunately, this whole subject of violence at work, mass shootings, which would include mass shootings, and it could include other things such as assault, just a simple assault and things like that. Unfortunately, this topic continues to be very timely, as you may know. Several months ago from the time I'm recording this video, a manager of a Wal-Mart in Chesapeake walked into the store, went into the break room, and started shooting fellow employees. After all was said and done, 6 employees were dead, plus the shooter, who I believe took his own life. And again, in our local area in Hampton Roads, a little over 3 years ago, May 31st, 2019, somebody who had recently been let go walked into the Virginia Beach Building 2, the Municipal Center, and killed 12 fellow employees over there. What many people don't realize is that it's not just the shooting victims and their families who have to pick up the shattered pieces of what's left of their lives after something like this, but all the other employees and other folks who were there that had to witness this horrible event, and saw their colleagues, with their brains blown out, and had to walk over dead bodies, and had to be, in some cases, had to, bar the door to try to keep the shooter from coming in the room. These people who survived and went through that experience, in many cases, are left with just horrific psychological scars. Many of these folks who have had to clean up the aftermath of these tragedies, for instance, who work for the police department, etc. Unfortunately, in scores of other places that we've heard about, like Las Vegas and its schools and other places nationwide, we all know the stories, have suffered and they continue to suffer from severe post-traumatic stress disorder and other psychiatric illnesses because of what they witnessed on their horrific day. So I know this because I've represented many of these people. And I can tell you firsthand from dealing with these clients that these psychiatric conditions in many cases can be absolutely debilitating, and in some cases will likely prevent some folks from ever returning to what you would call a normal existence. We're talking about a psychiatric trauma on a level so bad that these folks really, in some cases, aren't able to leave their home, aren't able to drive anymore, and much less engage in any type of employment, and in many cases, this is permanent. Today, though, I want to focus specifically on the basic law in Virginia workers' compensation specifically, as to workplace violence. Generally, if you're injured at work, even in a workplace violence situation, whether workers' comp coverage is available or not depends on a couple of different, very specific factual things. If you're at work and one of these things happens, okay, so you clearly fulfill the requirement, you're at work. So you are in the course and scope of employment when this happens, okay? But in Virginia, contrary to what many folks believe, and by the way, we've discussed this before in other videos, just because you're hurt at work does not mean you have an automatic workers' compensation claim in Virginia. Any of you who watch my videos, you may have come across one called risk of employment. So what does that mean? Virginia workers' compensation law briefly contains a concept that says that in addition to being at work, your injury must arise out of your job. In some way, the injury you suffered was caused by a risk that arose from your specific job. So you're at work and you trip and fall down some stairs, right? If the fall had nothing to do with any risks related to your job, meaning there's no defect in the stairs, you were not carrying anything, there was no work-related slippery substance like on the bottom of your shoes or something like that, you just flat out tripped over your own feet, you don't know why, you've got no Virginia workers' compensation case at all. Why? Because everyone, everywhere, at some point in their life has to go up and down stairs. Therefore, your injury is not going to arise out of a risk specific to employment. But in the stairs case, if your job required you to go up and down stairs carrying, let's say, files of very heavy stuff that obscured your view of the stairs or made it harder to go up and down the stairs, and you tripped because of that, that would probably be enough to say it's a risk of employment. So let's apply that concept to the workplace violence situation. Let's say a woman assailant, right, comes into a business, an office, let's say, with a gun. She's the wife of a man who has been cheating on her, and let's say with his secretary, the jealous wife comes in with a gun, shoots and kills her husband as well as the secretary lover, right? So maybe she could either shoot some other folks there too, God forbid, or perhaps some of the other employees just witness to seeing their boss and their colleague, be killed in front of them. Unfortunately, that case, as I've described it to you, would not be covered by workers' compensation. Because as we just said, the law of Virginia workers' compensation is that in order to be an injury at work covered by workers' comp, the injury must arise out of employment. So there's nothing about an office job generally that presents an increased risk of getting assaulted on that job. Also, as we're going to discuss in a minute, we know in the example we gave that the assailant was motivated by personal hatred, personal animus, or jealousy, and had nothing to do with anything related to that business or work. Therefore, that's not going to be a workers' compensation case. But what if we switch around and say now we're looking at an assailant coming into that same office with a gun because perhaps it's a bank, right? Or other high cash business, and this assailant knows that there's a safe in there with a lot of money in it, and she also knows the boss has the combination, and they have a security guard there, let's say. She shoots the security guard, as well as maybe the boss, to injure him, to motivate the boss to open the safe and give her the money, very violent kind of situation. Now we likely have a risk related to employment. How do you show a connection between the violent act that, some perpetrator does or, occurs and the job itself? So the law of Virginia, there are actually a couple of different ways, basic ways, to show a causal link or risk between employment and the assault. Okay. First one is to show that the assault resulted from an increased risk of assault created by the employment. In our example, there's cash on hand, there's a security guard there, and maybe there's other evidence that showed this was a rough neighborhood. There's been some other robberies. That would show an increased or augmented risk of assault or attack on that job. Second way you can prove it is by showing that the motivation for the assailant as to the attack was related to his or her employment or the employment or job of the victim or victims. What we generally mean by increased risk is that the nature of the job itself, either because of the worker is required to do so or where the worker is required to be, exposes that individual to a greater risk of assault. Let's say it's your job to make bank deposits, for instance, and you have to walk through a dangerous neighborhood with a bag of cash. Increased risk of assault. Let's say that your job requires you to drive through the highest crime area of the city, known for gun violence, and you get shot. That could be an increased risk. What if you're a cashier at an all-night market and you're held up at gunpoint? Certainly an increased risk. Or let's say you're a nurse in a mental ward with potentially violent patients and you're attacked and assaulted and injured by a patient. Okay? All these involve increased or augmented risk of assault. So that's the first method. There's also another method to prove that, it's an increased risk, and that's to show that the assailant was motivated in his or her assault by the employment itself. I'm going to mention the Virginia Beach shooting, which was a horrific tragedy. We know that through a private investigation that was done early on, they couldn't definitively state what the motivation was that the shooter has, but it did appear that the assailant was angry with regard to discipline he was given, as to an unauthorized work-related contract he entered into, as well as feelings and allegations by this shooter that he had been unfairly passed over for advancement by his superiors. This was all in emails and things that they found. The investigated report concluded that when viewed collectively, these messages may have provided the shooter with the rationale to take aggressive action toward these folks. In other words, the shootings were all related to work interactions with his victims. Now I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about an interesting aspect of these sorts of cases, and that is the possibility of going outside workers' comp and filing a lawsuit. Many folks call us all the time and say, well, can't I sue my employer? You mean I'm stuck with workers' comp? What are you talking about? And the answer is most of the time, yes. If your case is compensable, you are stuck with workers' comp. There's really not going to be any way around it. But what if you could show the roles are reversed as far as being a claimant in the case? In other words, now you want to get more money because everybody kind of knows, I don't know if you're aware of this, but you can get a lot more money in a personal injury case than you can in a workers' comp case. As we discussed in other videos, workers' comp does not provide you with the opportunity to claim pain and suffering and all that kind of thing that's outside of workers' comp. You got your weeks that you're entitled to be off of work, you got your medical stuff, and that's pretty much it, okay? But in a personal injury case, you've got a jury that you're going to come before, and they can render a verdict, and they can render it based on many, many different factors, including pain and suffering and everything that you've had to go through and are still going through with regard to your injury. So those cases can be worth a lot more money. In some cases, you're going to want to try to pursue, if you can, a personal injury case if there's negligence on the part of the employer. Some of you may be aware, in the Wal-Mart cases, for instance, an attorney has actually filed a few lawsuits on behalf of some employees against the employer. What is he claiming? He's claiming, look, you shouldn't have hired this shooter. You knew that he had violent tendencies. You rehired him after knowing that he had violent tendencies. And of course, what did he do? Eventually, he shot people. So they're saying, this attorney is saying Wal-Mart is negligent in their continued employment of this violent individual who ended up shooting 6 people, right? Now, normally, that is not going to fly. Why? Because if the defense, and then this is where I say the roles are reversed, okay, in this kind of situation. Now, the person who represents the employer is going to be trying to say, no, we're accepting this claim as workers' comp, which they actually have done for some of these folks. I'm not talking about the folks that died. I'm talking about some people that maybe got shot and injured and didn't die, or they had some other kind of slight injury as they were trying to escape. I think that's who he's representing, this fellow that filed these claims. So the question is going to become, was this act, that this horrible thing that this guy did, that these shootings, were they motivated because of employment, or was it personal? And I think personally, in my opinion, this guy's going to have a hard time because, he only targeted employees. He didn't target anybody else. He wasn't just going on a random shooting spree. He went there and went after, I believe he was a supervisor. He went after his fellow employees. So we'll have to see. It's too early to say. We'll have to see how it turns out. If the claim is ruled compensable, in other words, it's ruled by the commission that this is a compensable claim, it's related to work, despite the fact that it's an assault, then that's going to be it. He's not going to be able to have that claim, and those victims are going to be limited to workers' compensation. If you recall, there's a young lady, a teacher, Mrs. Werner, in Newport News, that was shot. She's a first grade teacher. She was shot by her 6-year-old student in the classroom, okay? So in that case, Newport News also is doing the same thing that Wal-Mart did. They're saying, we're accepting the workers' comp claim. She was at work, and she hires an attorney, a personal injury attorney, and I think a couple of personal injury attorneys, and then she's suing the school district and the school board for like $40 million. The allegations are the school knew, and the school board knew or should have known, that this kid had a gun, that he was dangerous, that he would have been a problem for a long time. And so far, at the time of this recording, the judge is letting at least the discovery go into those facts. In other words, he's letting that proceed. How is this lawyer getting around the fact that she was working at the time? And then why isn't she limited to workers' comp? Well, now we get into the job. Does her job generally, does that job prevent an increased risk of being shot by your student? And the answer is no. So that's their argument, that this is not part of her job. This is not part of the increased risk of her job. A 6-year-old can't really have any intent, so we can't even really say that the 6-year-old shot her because she's the teacher. Maybe he was just mad. If it's found that it's not compensable because this was not something you would expect in that job, and the kid did not shoot the teacher because she's the teacher, just he was mad and had personal animus toward this lady, then this personal injury lawsuit for $40 million can move ahead. Anybody who wants to try to bring a personal injury claim has got to get past this workers' compensation bar or stoppage to recovery for anything other than workers' comp. And in most cases, your normal run-of-the-mill case, that's hard. You've got to be able to show, number one, that it's not compensable, and number two, you got to be able to show some kind of negligence on the part of whatever entity you are suing. What if you're in a case where you have a random act of violence, like we said before, this crazy lady that's jealous of her husband walks in and shoots somebody, or just a random shooting that has nothing to do with anything, just some crazy terrorist, God knows what, that comes in and shoots people, has no connection to the business or anything. You don't have a workers' comp claim. There's probably no negligence claim against the business. What can you do? Is there anything you can do? So the answer is yes in Virginia. Okay, and this is this woman, Tabitha Saunders, that I presented with at the conference that I mentioned earlier on. And she is with the Virginia Victims Fund. Who are they and what do they do? It's a fund that's established in a situation where you've exhausted, you don't have any other options for any other recovery. In other words, if you have a valid workers' comp claim or a personal injury claim, they're not going to be able to help you. But if you don't, they are a payer of last resort. I mean, if you don't have these options, then you can go to them. What are they going to help you with? They can assist you with many expenses related to the assault. And this is just for assaults, criminal assaults, workplace violence, things like that. They can assist you with many expenses related to the assault, including payment for medical treatment, grief counseling, lost wages, funeral and burial expenses of the victim, temporary housing, many other expenses related to your status or your loved one's status as a victim of a violent crime. If you or a loved one have been a victim of a violent crime or assault at work, I recommend that you call us. Just give us a call. We'll be happy to talk to you about it. I know it's hard to talk to, but we have experience with this. Okay, we've represented quite a few folks that have been through this. Meanwhile, let's pray together that we never have to hear about any of these shootings or violent assaults ever again. Okay, this is Joe Miller. Have a blessed day. Please stay safe. Joe Miller out.